Well, hello, church history friends. My name is Barb Walden, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program. Tonight is not a lecture, it's not a seminar, it's not a workshop, it's a highlights tour of our upcoming Drawn from the Nations of the World Church History Tour that's taking place October 6th through the 15th. So I hope you're not expecting any highly educated scholars. Instead, you're stuck with Peter Smith, Wendy Eaton, and myself to talk all about our bus tour coming up in October. This will be the ninth tour Peter and I have shared since our first in 2013. If you have joined us on a bus tour before, we would love to hear from you in the chat. So please chime into the chat with your name or the year or title of the tour that you remember going on. The chat chirping will feel like a nice reunion for many of us. But before Peter and I dive into the details behind this year's tour, I want to tell you about the latest church history happenings that are going on here at the Historic Sites Foundation. There's a lot going on. And here we go. Many, many thanks to all of those who joined us in Kirtland for the Palm Sunday weekend. Oh, it was a weekend of church history classes with Kristen McKay, Seth Bryant, and John Charles Duffy leading those classes and exploring Kirtland hope and history. I think a number of you that are on with us tonight were also there for Palm Sunday, and it was a joy to see you. Locke and I led some walking tours that included the cemetery and the historic neighborhood that surrounds the Kirtland Temple, and there was a lot of casual conversation among those who gathered here in Kirtland. It really was a great weekend for lots of time for stories and stories of hope and heritage. So thank you for all of those who helped support that. The weekend was topped off with a Palm Sunday service that was held inside the lower court of the Kirtland Temple. And John Charles Duffy presided over the service. He did a marvelous job. That service included a number of people gathered in the lower court sharing in song and scripture. It was a meaningful experience. The service was also streamed across the church with congregations logging in from all over the United States that day, congregations from Canada, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, and even Trinidad and Tobago. President Prophet Designate Stacey Cram, who you see here, gave the morning message, and it was truly inspirational. The service was also recorded, and if you didn't see it live that Sunday morning, I encourage you to check it out for Stacey's message alone. Wendy will drop the link to the video in the chat that'll take you to the Historic Sites Foundation's YouTube channel, where you can experience the Palm Sunday service from the Kirtland Temple at your own convenience. It's certainly worth it. Also, get out your calendars, friends, for our spring lecture series. The popular online lectures are returning this May, and the topics and speakers will again explore church history from French Polynesia to Lamoni, Iowa, and even Zambia. We're going to kick off that series next Thursday with Paul DeBarth. We'll spend the evening with Paul, who serves as the site director at the Joseph Smith III's Liberty Hall, and we'll hear the fascinating connection between 1840s Nauvoo, Community of Christ's beginnings in French Polynesia, and the Lakota Nation. The stories of Benjamin Garrard and his son Frank will sound like the storyline straight out of an old Western movie. It is absolutely fascinating. Benjamin Garrard was among the first 4 missionaries that set out from Nauvoo in the 1840s and founded the church in French Polynesia. Paul also has an ancestral connection to the Garrards, and you'll learn all about it when you join us next Thursday. It really is a fascinating period in church history, and the Garrards are even more fascinating. Then the next week, on May 8th, we'll welcome Bunda Chibwe to the series. It will be an intimate evening with the Community of Christ apostle and soon to be member of the First Presidency. Bunda will take us on a personal journey through his life. He'll share his story, and we'll see the formative places that impacted his journey and hear how his story weaves into the story of the founding of Community of Christ in Zambia. This night will be the third program in our growing series, Your Story is Church History. And I'm thrilled that Bunda has agreed to share with us as a storyteller that night. Then, our third evening in the spring lecture series will feature our friend Jim Jones. Friends, have you ever visited Rose Hill Cemetery, that wonderful historic cemetery located next door to Joseph Smith's home in Lamoni, Iowa? If you haven't, if you haven't been to Rose Hill, and if you love church history, this is an evening lecture you do not want to miss. Jim Jones is the sexton at the historic Rose Hill Cemetery, and we're going to learn what it takes to preserve and share the stories behind those buried at Rose Hill. Wendy and I met earlier this week with Jim Jones and got a sneak peek of his presentation, and it was really good. We learned the fascinating theory that Marietta Walker's headstone is not actually her headstone. Jim suspects it's her footstone in preparation for a much larger headstone. So, hey, that might give us a future project to raise money to build Marietta Walker a fabulous headstone there in Rose Hill. So, join us May 15th as Jim Jones uncovers all of these fascinating facts and theories about Rose Hill. It's really a night you don't want to miss. And then on May 22nd, our spring series will draw to a close with Community of Christ theologian Tony Chavala Smith, or as we refer to him here, as Peter Smith's brother. Kind of like the brother of Jared, he's the brother of Peter Smith. So Tony will explore the historical context and the theological significance of the first and only edition of the Nauvoo Expositor. I know I say this is a lecture you don't want to miss over and over again, but really, this is one you don't want to skip. For even more information about the spring lecture series, the dates, the topics, the speakers, be sure to check out our website. And Wendy will drop the link in the chat where you can start registering for this exciting series. There's also a new internship position available in the Alma Blair internship program. One lucky intern will have the opportunity to explore the Graceland University archival collection at the Frederick M. Smith Library, located on the Graceland campus there in Lamoni. It's a hands-on history experience. And Wendy's going to drop the link in the chat where you can learn more about the summer position and to apply. We'd love for you to apply, or if you know anyone who might be interested, please send this link on with them or share this great summer opportunity. And lastly, none of these online programs and internships would be possible without your generous support. Thank you, friends, for your donations and your monthly gifts throughout the year. For those who'd like to give tonight or give to support the spring lecture series, you can see on the screen there's 3 easy ways to support the Historic Sites Foundation: through online giving and gifts through the mail. Wendy will drop the online link in the chat for those wishing to make a donation tonight. We know there are a lot of outstanding educational organizations out there that you're supporting, and a lot of options of organizations to support. So we can't thank you enough for thinking of us, friends, when it comes to your generosity and your support for preserving church history. Thank you, thank you. Joining me tonight are my co-hosts, who are going to do a little bit more than they usually do. Those co-hosts are Peter Smith and Wendy Eaton. Peter serves as a board member for the Historic Sites Foundation and co-host for our annual bus tours. Wendy serves as the administrative assistant for the Historic Sites Foundation and the assistant archivist for Community of Christ. So welcome, Peter and Wendy. I'm so glad you're here. It's going to be a great night. And it's at this point I typically dive into a long introduction of our esteemed guest speaker. But tonight it's a little awkward because Peter and I are the headliners for a show where we don't often present ourselves, and frankly, we prefer to be behind the scenes. But we're so excited about this bus tour. We want to be out there with the camera pointing at us, telling you all about that. So rather than a formal introduction, I'll hand the spotlight over to Peter to share a little bit about how he became involved in these annual bus tours and what keeps him coming back year after year. I suggested that I introduce them, but we have spent so much time together. We're a little leery of introducing one another out of fear of what could be said. What happens on the bus tour, of course, stays on the bus tour. So, Peter, tell us a little bit about your experience on these bus tours.
All right, I can do that. And I am thrilled to be here with everyone tonight. And I do have to joke. I've joked quite often that uh, as I was young and growing up, and especially when I joined the church when I was 18, going on 19 years old, I was always known as Tony's brother and Tony's little brother. And some people would call me Tony. And so it is always a fun way to tease my brother to say, "Hey, are you Peter Smith's brother?" So I encourage all of you, if you get a chance, to say, "Oh, I know you. You're Peter's brother." And he'll get a laugh out of it. And I'll hear from him later, either by text or by phone call, telling me how much he enjoyed the fact that the whole church gets to make fun of him that way. So I first met Barb at a winter reunion at Deer Haven in Florida. Have a wonderful reunion there at the end of January every year. And it may have even been her first year as a guest there, representing the foundation when I first met her. Um, and I can't remember if it was the first year or second year, Barb, that you were there, that we really kind of made a great connection with each other. And a little while later, I heard from Barb asking me if I was interested in all in doing this little thing called a bus tour that I at first wasn't sure if I was interested in spending a bunch of days on a bus until she told me what the theme was of the first one, and it was Sing the Sacred Story. And those of you who know me know that I love music and I love church music and I love hymns and I enjoy leading them. And so it was very easy for me to say yes after I found out what my job was going to be. And that job was to be the bus pastor and also be someone who would lead music on that trip, especially while we were on the bus and at other times as well. And so it turned into such a wonderful experience for me. And we coined the phrase that our bus tours are a reunion on wheels. They're a family camp on wheels. And we just, every time we've had one of these trips, we turn into family by the end. I have friends around the church because of these trips, people that I care about deeply and have grown to love deeply as well. And it just year after year has been this amazing experience. We've laughed together, we cry together, we share with one another, we sing together, and every time Barb says, "Are you willing to do another one?" I say yes, and so here I am again for this. Will be our 10th one then this fall, won't it, Barb? Together anyway. Yes, so can't wait, and I hope to see a lot of you with us.
Yeah, it's hard to believe we're coming up on our 10th one and we're so young and vibrant. How is that even possible? My experience with the annual bus tour began in the fall of 2011 with David Ettinger. I'd never been on a bus tour before. I was hired by the Historic Sites Foundation as the executive director in 2010. And in 2011, David was on the board. He had served as president of the board of directors for the Historic Sites Foundation for a number of years, but he had also served a couple of decades before as the executive director of the Historic Sites Foundation, which at the time was called Restoration Trail Foundation. And David has a long and extensive history involving leading bus tours for guests of all ages. He's taken a number of bus tours with senior high youth from the Council Bluffs Mission Center, and I'm sure other mission centers. So he has plenty of experience. So in 2011, as a board member, he had agreed to host a tour where I could be his sidekick to learn everything that he had to teach me. He coordinated the entire tour. I would lead some of the classes, but it was really me watching him to see how it's done and done successfully. Because if you're going to learn how to lead a bus tour, David is the professor to show you how it's done. So in October 2011, we had a full bus of 50 wonderful guests who traveled the Restoration Trail from Independence to Council Bluffs, all the way through Canada to the Sacred Grove. I think we went as far east as the Shaker Village in Western Massachusetts, and then all the way back again to Independence. And as I mentioned, this was my Intro to Church History Bus Tours 101 training course. And it seemed like every rare situation that could happen on a bus tour took place on this tour. And it was at no fault of anyone. From We had nonstop rain for about 7 days on that 10-day tour. We accidentally got a speeding ticket when we entered in Canada. We had unexpected road closures that led to long detours. And we had two guests making a trip to the ER, one for an allergic reaction and another for a case of vertigo, both of those happening in the same day to the same ER. Fortunately, our medical emergencies were resolved within a few hours, and the guests were back on the bus the next day, rolling down the road really in no time. So to be trained by David was a special experience, but to be trained on a tour where so many of these rare occurrences happened, it was an educational experience of a lifetime. So it was great learning, sitting under David's leadership and his incredible gift for not only coordinating tours, but I think he's one of Community of Christ's best storytellers. So just to sit in as he led worship services and shared stories about our faith community's past, but also stories from the heart of his own journey. To this day, I think he still is one of my favorite storytellers. I can also share that I've led um, 10 tours since then. I've only had one tour without Peter, and we have never encountered as much rain as we did on that 2011 tour. Um, we also haven't had anybody go to the emergency room. So we're on a great winning streak here on the tours. So, speaking of church history, let's dive into this year's tour, drawn from the nations of the world. I'm going to do a quick screen share that includes pictures of places where we're going, but also some photos of past tours. So you might appear in some of these photos. Doctrine and Covenants, section 161, 6b, challenges Community of Christ to, quote, heed the urgent call to become a global family. So when asked, why are we choosing this theme drawn from the nations of the world? We're called in the Doctrine and Covenants to heed that urgent call to become a global family. And part of becoming a global family is developing a shared story of who we are as a worldwide body, along with shared images of our worldwide community. We often think about Community of Christ global family being born during the mid 20th century when the church is being born in Asia and the continent of Africa. But there has been a global voice within our faith tradition much longer than the mid 20th century. There's also historic places to visit here in the United States and Canada that help share the story behind the people that represent our global family history. So that's what we're looking forward to in exploring really on this 2025 tour. Now, the first day of our 10-day tour will kick off in Independence inside the Temple Chapel. This is one of my favorite parts of the tour. When we gather into the chapel, because we've done this a number of times. Um, Honestly, I don't know if we've ever began a tour without gathering into the chapel. But the reason it's one of my favorites is you notice the guests when they first enter into the chapel and take a seat, they're all awkwardly settling in and looking around at a room full of strangers, probably wondering what they've gotten themselves into at this point. But it's also a magical moment because I know deep friendships will be born among these strangers gathered in the chapel over our 10-day period. I just know that we will all be a little teary eyed saying goodbye to one another 10 days from that moment. It's also here that Peter starts us off in a devotion. So I think this moment to be present in it on day one, for me, is kind of a sacred moment of anticipation for what's to come over that 10-day journey, knowing that we're all going to grow closer as friends and as a faith community. So, Peter, tell us a little bit about what you are thinking about when you go into these devotions, because you're leading the devotion.
I know that a lot of times when we first get to the temple and get on the bus, people will bring their luggage. The bus will be packed, and a lot of people get right on the bus thinking, "Well, we're just going to take right off from that moment." And yet this time that we actually come back into the chapel here and spend these moments of preparation are such a meaningful way for us to center ourselves before we take off on this journey together. And I always consider these bus tours a pilgrimage. They feel like a pilgrimage. We have opportunities to go deeply spiritual, opportunities to celebrate nature, and as Barb shared, opportunities to grow together as a family, as the body of Christ. And so, in these first moments here, usually I try to help people center into the fact that we're going to be sharing some time together and with the sacred divine through the rest of this trip, and that it's not just your typical, get on a bus or get on a cruise ship and head on and then come back to port, but we really do enter into a journey where we grow very deeply, and experience God in ways that maybe we expect to, but in a lot of times in ways that we don't even expect to. A lot of happy and profound tears have been shared on bus trips in the past. And so this is a perfect opportunity for us to all be reminded as we go into our time together that there's keep your eyes open, keep your heart open, because God has lots in store for us as we share in this time.
Mhm. Amen to that. After the devotion in the chapel, we'll have an opportunity to tour the temple with Roger Rose, who is the former site director of the Kirtland Temple, who now serves as head of visitor services there in Independence. And he'll give us a tour through the temple, but doing it through a global family perspective. There's a lot of art throughout the temple that comes from outside of the United States, that comes from all over the world. And he'll be highlighting that and the influence of the global family on this sacred site. We'll also venture across the street over to the auditorium and see that as a global perspective. I think for me and many of us, when I think of us as a global community of Christ, I get flashbacks to World Conference in the auditorium and seeing those flags unfurled of all of the countries where there's a community of Christ presence. So it makes sense for a tour like this, where we're talking about a story that's drawn from the nations of the world, that we'd have to go to the historic auditorium. We're also crossing over to the UN Peace Plaza and making our way to Heritage Plaza, where Roger Rose will continue to share with us both the past of Community of Christ as well as the present as we make our way around the headquarters complex. Passing by that UN Peace Plaza and heading over to Heritage Plaza, where there better not be snow on the ground in October of 2025. But this beautiful image shows the Joseph Luff House on the right, which is currently a residence. But there are two other historic buildings that are open for tours. The building in the center is President Frederick Madison Smith's study, and we'll have a chance to go in there, as well as to the building all the way to the left. That red brick building is the Flournoy House, which dates back to the 1830s. Typically on these bus tours, we'll have a devotion in the chapel, and then we hurry right back onto the bus to head out of town. But this year, we're going to stick around and explore the headquarters complex through the lens of a global family. So after we visit Heritage Plaza, Roger Rose will take us right back to the temple where our day began, and we'll go into the church archives and spend time with Rachel Killebrew, who's the Community of Christ archivist and librarian, and she's going to pull treasures from the museum collection and from the church archives that represent our drawn from the nations of the world theme. So this is material culture artifacts that help share the story of who we are in Community of Christ historically, as well as who we are today. And I'm really excited to see some of these things that aren't normally out for exhibit, and we'll have a chance to see that on day one of the tour. Then we're going to grab our box lunches from Dave's Deli and we'll hit the road heading up to Council Bluffs, where we'll stop off with our friends at the Council Bluffs Community of Christ. Pastor Rob Heverling has extended warm hospitality to us, and we'll be spending 2 nights with him. But this first night, Michael Wright, who is traveling over from Italy to be with us on the tour. Michael Wright will meet us at the Community of Christ congregation there in Council Bluffs, and he will lead a class on the life and legacy of John and Marie Avendette. For those of you who are on the Italy tour, you'll know that name, Avendette. John Avendette was the first Italian missionary of the reorganization. He was born among the Waldensian valleys of the Piedmont region in Italy in 1828 at a time of great change happening in Italy. He was born as a Waldensian, a primitivist and a dissenting faith tradition, and Avendette's faith journey will introduce him to the Restoration, which would take him on a literal journey from the Italian Dolomites to the Wasatch Mountains of the American West in Utah to the prairies of Nebraska and back to his native Italy as the reorganization's first Italian missionary. Michael will explore the places, the denominations, the historic events, and folks who surrounded Avendette to get to know a little bit better this little known saint. I'm excited about that because we'll understand the Avendette story in preparation for the next day on October 7th. We're going to go where John and his wife Marie are buried in the historic Forest Lawn Cemetery in Omaha. They're buried in unmarked graves, and we're going to change that. That second day on the bus, we will have a dedication of 2 grave markers at the Forest Lawn Cemetery, and you're looking at drafts of what those markers are going to look like. We'll have an unveiling and a dedication. We'll be making our own history the second day of the tour. And after that dedication, we'll then visit a couple of the sites in the area, like the Winter Quarters Cemetery and Cutler's Park Cemetery. There's also the possibility that we'll visit the Canesville Tabernacle. And we're going to look at this historic region through the lens of Latter-day Seekers during the 19th century. People like the British immigrant Charles Derry, who was one of our most successful missionaries. And we'll look at it through the lens of Mark Forscutt, who was in this area. Both men were instrumental in planting the RLDS congregations throughout Western Iowa and Eastern Nebraska during that latter half of the 19th century, and we'll explore their stories. We'll end the day with dinner and a storytellers program at the Council Bluffs congregation. The storytellers program is really a casual night where 3 of us share a story that relates to the theme. In this case, it'll be about various people who've come through the Council Bluffs area and contributed to the heritage of this place. And then we'll open it up to all those in attendance to share along the same theme, whether it be the movers and shakers that enter into our lives or what our experience has been like as a global family. We'll have a chance to have dinner with the Community of Christ congregation and then an evening of tales that night. Then on to the road the next morning. We'll kick off our time in Lamoni by visiting Joseph Smith III's Liberty Hall. And one of the things people don't often know about Liberty Hall is that Joseph Smith III's in-laws, who were Norwegian immigrants, also lived with the Smith family in Liberty Hall for a while. So we're going to explore Liberty Hall as Paul DeBarth takes us on a tour and his team of volunteers, sharing in many ways the international scope of the reorganization during the Lamoni period. And while the church headquarters are in Lamoni, we begin raising money for a variety of missionary ventures. One of those being raising money for the Evanelia, the missionary boat that traveled to Tahiti. So we'll talk about the expansion of the church during Joseph Smith III's presidency, which was a pretty significant expansion overseas into a number of European countries. Gomer Griffiths went to the British Isles, Australia, and all over, for example. You can see him as a historic cutout right there with a railroad car next to what would have been the train station there in Lamoni. And there's a wonderful story from the 20th century of Kasuku Sukini and Saku arriving by train and being greeted by Graceland students and church members alike as they arrived to attend school at Graceland. Specifically, Saku's story is really touching. So while we're in in Lamoni. We'll talk a little bit about that. I, Apostle Kasuku Sakini, he later becomes apostle. He was a courageous pioneer on our journey in Community of Christ to be an international church. We had a lecture with Phil Caswell and Andrew Bolton a couple of years ago, who both knew Kasuku Sakini and worked with him. And they talked of Sakini's deep Christian commitment in an Asian context, how he faced racism and misunderstandings in the church. But to those who knew him, knew that he was just a capable, loving brother in Christ. And so we're going to talk a little bit about their stories while we're in Lamoni. And then we'll head over to the Graceland campus to talk a little bit about the international expansion of students there in Lamoni on the Graceland campus. We'll talk about Gobert Edit and Community of Christ expansion in southeastern Nigeria during the 1960s and 70s. That expansion began with a missionary tract or a brochure that was written by a Welsh Community of Christ member. So we'll talk about Gobert's story. He read the tract, contacted church leaders in the United States requesting a missionary to come to Nigeria. Cecil Ettinger was involved in that, and we'll share a little bit more about that story and how Gobert ended up as a student at Graceland for a little bit. Now, that's the third day of the trip, and we're going to end it in Keokuk, Iowa, the eastern part of Iowa, because the very next day, on day 4, we're going to head over to the sites in Nauvoo, and we're going to begin the day with a devotion in the upper room of the Red Brick Store. I'm excited about this opportunity to hold a worship service with our group there in the Red Brick Store. This place is significant because the first 4 missionaries to Tahiti or French Polynesia were set apart for this mission in the upper room of the Red Brick Store. And we'll talk about that significance of this being a small room, a tiny room, but great things happened that came from this room, which in many ways reminds me of how congregations throughout the church are small congregations, but out of those small congregations come incredible things that can impact the world. And we will hear about that and see how that happens in the upper room of the Red Brick Store, where a number of significant things took place in that space. Now, this is not the original Red Brick Store, it's a reconstruction on the original foundation, but we'll talk a little bit about what great things can come from small places. And Peter, you're going to lead the devotion for the first time in the Red Brick Store. Tell us a little bit about what you have in mind.
I'm especially excited because I get to lead this devotion here. We've experienced a few worship services during previous bus trips in this space, and it is a very intimate and lovely space to share in worship together. I'm excited to imagine us in that place, thinking about some of those who came before us and how they were sent out into the world, and how so much of our missionary endeavors started right there. And so we will touch on that, and we will maybe even have an opportunity to share some of our own experiences, either being sent out or receiving those who were sent in our direction and may have been the reason that we are actually part of this denomination. And so we'll have a very lovely morning there, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And after that devotion, our friends from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints have given us permission for Community of Christ to lead the tour through the historic sites there on the flats, which is an incredible, generous gesture of hospitality. I'm amazed by that generosity. So they're going to allow us to tour the mansion house, the homestead. I'll be leading the tour. We're going to have Megan Edvilson helping out with those tours. The walking tour will involve seeing Nauvoo history through the lens of our British church members during the 1840s. And when you think about it, our missionary work outside of the United States really began in Canada in 1833, but it was the 1837 British Isles mission that really launched our faith community into an international movement. By 1851, over 50,000 people had been baptized during this period, and W.H.G. Armitage, a British social historian, called it the most spectacular harvest of souls since Wesley's time. And that's British citizens, residents joining the Latter day Saint movement. So by the 1840s, many of those converts make their way to the United States, and they were all being warmly welcomed in Nauvoo. By 1844, over 4,000 British converts had arrived in Nauvoo, which at that time was a city around 12,000 to 13,000 residents. So, as Andrew Bolton likes to point out, 1 in 3 Nauvoo residents spoke with a British accent. Uh, that's huge. So it makes sense that we want to talk about who some of those British immigrants were. We'll mention John Taylor, who came from England, was a convert in Toronto, and we'll talk more about that when we're in Canada. But he was a pretty significant person in Nauvoo as the editor of the Times and Seasons, the church newspaper, whose banner motto was "Truth Will Prevail," which was a political slogan that also appeared in the general election in Preston, England, when the first missionaries arrived in 1837. So there are a number of connections overseas that appear in Nauvoo that, in many ways, I'm just learning about, and I'm excited that we'll have a chance to share about that on this tour. We'll also have a chance to talk about Sutcliffe Maudsley, who was an immigrant from England, and over a 4-year period as an artist, he painted a number of profile images of leading citizens in Nauvoo that helped document history, especially his profiles of the Smith family. So it gives us a deeper insight to what was happening in Nauvoo. And lastly, we'll take a look at William Law. He was an immigrant from Ireland, and take a look at his role in the Nauvoo story. Then we'll have lunch at Camp Nauvoo, which is the Community of Christ reunion ground that sits up on the hill. And that location, I think, has one of the best scenic views of the Mississippi River in all of Nauvoo. So join us on the tour and prove me wrong. I think it's really a beautiful view. And you get a chance to see the reunion grounds there in Nauvoo. We'll then end that day in Mission or with the Mission Community of Christ congregation. And it was a congregation built by a number of Norwegian immigrant families. It's a congregation with a rich history. And I've asked Wendy to share a little bit about that history because she did some research in preparation for a visit that the board of directors for the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation had there in Mission last November. So Wendy, take it away.
So not only are the great people of the Mission congregation incredible hosts with various activities that the Historic Sites Foundation have held in the area, one of their earliest families contained one of my absolute favorite women in church history, and that's Bertha Madison Smith. The Madison family moved around quite a bit. Mads and Mary were both Norwegian immigrants, as were many of their neighbors in that north central part of Illinois. They married and began their family and continued moving around. At one point, not too long after Bertha was born, they were in southeastern Minnesota and eventually sent Bertha back to Illinois so that she could be educated. Not liking to have the family separated, they moved back to Illinois and they continued to reside in the vicinity of where the mission congregation is today. But they weren't members quite at that point. It was when Bertha and her older sister Anna had grown and left the home that they hear their father had joined with a Mormon church, and they were scandalized that he had done that. But eventually they learn who these people were, and the two of them join as well. And it became very beneficial for our church leading family because Joseph Smith III's wife, Emmeline, was not doing well. And Bertha moved into the Smith home in Plano to help take care of Emmeline and the home and the 3 little girls. Eventually, when Emmeline died and Joseph took her back to Nauvoo to be buried, Bertha took the three little girls, Emma, Carrie, and Zadie, to her home, her parents' home in Mission, Illinois, to recover a little bit from the difficulties of losing their mother before the family got back together in Plano. And so the Mission congregation, that area, the church members there, many of them ancestors were Norwegian immigrants, and that incredible hospitality can be seen well over 100 years ago and today. So I'm excited that this is going to be included on the trip this year.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Bertha was known for her hospitality or warm hospitality, as was the Madison family. And so it makes sense that as founding members of this congregation, that the congregation continues that ministry of hospitality. Here you see an image of Tammy Perriman, who's the pastor of that congregation. She's welcoming our group, previous tour to the Plano Mission area. She is going to be welcoming us this October 9th for dinner at that congregation. And you can see the dining room that members of the board of directors are sitting around enjoying this delicious Norwegian meal that was made with the loving hands of the members of the mission congregation. And so we'll have a chance to experience that hospitality on October 9th, and we'll have a chance to see their historic sanctuary, which you can see some images here of a storyteller's night happening there last November. You can also see an image of young Bertha Madison Smith, who is one of Wendy's favorite people, as we just learned. Then the next morning, we're going to journey to the Plano Stone Church and hold a devotion, a morning devotion to kick off the day there in Plano, which Peter will be leading. As you see in the image here, he's leading a Vesper service one evening for a previous bus tour. Well, instead of an evening Vesper service where we'll be at the mission congregation, we're now doing a morning devotion, which will be new for Peter. And Peter, what do you have in mind for the October 10th devotion?
Once again, there's something just profoundly meaningful with being in that space there, and knowing all of the people who have come before us and stood at that lectern, that podium, and sat in those pews. And so the Plano Stone Church is especially a place where I like us to pause and really appreciate and take in the moment of where we are, especially in the history of the reorganization. And so that will be part of our theme while we're there during this devotion, is to just once again be present in the moment there, to celebrate the fact that we have this opportunity to continue church history in these places, and continue to tell the story and be part of the story while we're there. I In the past, we've been able to hear the organ played. I would love it if at some point we could hear that organ again, or even start it up, and I could probably play a hymn on it. And it's a lot of fun to be in that space and sing to the organ that's there. We'll see if that happens or not. But in the meantime, it'll be a wonderful place to start off our day together.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And that is a historically significant place. The headquarters of the church was there in Plano from 1866 until the 1880s. The church seal was designed here in 1874, and you can see on the screen an early image of what that seal would have looked like. And you could see the lion and the lamb and the child, they're standing on three separate islands, and those islands represent the continents where the church had a presence. In addition, you have that palm tree that's there on the left. That palm tree is a tip of the hat to the church in French Polynesia. They're in a general conference in 1874 as the news comes in about RLDS missionaries that happened to be passing through French Polynesia and discovered there was a presence of the church there from those early missionaries of the 1840s, and that was cause for celebration. So, and among that celebration, church members design the seal of the church and include a palm tree. So when we think about drawn from the nations of the world, that's even reflected in our first church seal. We also see the Plano Railroad Station while we're there, and that's where missionaries were sent out from, which was a big change from Nauvoo, which geographically wasn't the best place for people to be coming in and out. There wasn't a railroad there. It was difficult to get to, it was difficult to get out of. But Plano, being so close to Chicago with its own railroad station, was great for an active, engaged church that was sending missionaries out all over the world. So we'll talk a little bit about that while we're in Plano. But then we'll hop back on the road and we'll head over to Indiana, where we'll have lunch at a place called Das Deutschman. And we'll learn a little bit about the Amish community, and we'll have one of the biggest feasts we'll have on this tour. We will eat well for lunch that day because we're then going to hop back on the road and head up to Frankenmuth, Michigan, which is known as Little Bavaria. And it's also wildly known as the place with the largest Christmas store, I think, on earth. Peter's a huge fan of Christmas. So, what do you want to tell us about this huge Bronner's that's in your home state of Michigan?
Well, let me just tell you, we probably could plan a whole tour around this place because of how big it is. It's a wonderful, wonderful stop. Many of you have probably been there. I am a huge fan of Christmas. And so for me, this will be like an hour, our time of devotion while we're there. It'll be my time to walk around and probably purchase a few things, which I have done in the past when we've stopped here. Ornaments, decorations, all of that. They take special care there, as you can see. They recognize that Christmas is all about the birth of Jesus, and they that nativity scene you see there will probably be there. They have some of those around year round. It's a great fun place, and I think you'll enjoy your time there. They have a couple photo opportunity spots as well, where you can just surround yourself with decorations and have a festive moment a couple months before you probably really want to. But you'll have a great time, I promise. I wanted to also mention that Das Deutschman or Das Deutschman, however we say that, what an amazing buffet they have there. They have wonderful food, and almost the whole place is surrounded by shopping. A lot of that fun kind of shopping. There's even shopping across the parking lot as well. Kind of specialty shops that some will have, soaps, and as you can see here, these are quilts and blankets and things like that. It is a fun stop as well. So even though the buffet is delicious, I would imagine you might want to eat quickly so you have an opportunity to check out some of the stores while you're there. And quite a few of you will leave with a bag with something in it when you're done there.
Yeah, yeah. The quilts alone are incredible. The handcrafted things are just amazing. So we will, from Das Deutschman, head to Frankenmuth, where we're going to see Bronner's Christmas store. We're going to have dinner there in Frankenmuth at Zender's famous um, chicken dinners. I've heard over and over again these are the best fried chicken dinners you'll ever have in your life. You let us know. Try it out and tell us if it's the best you've ever had. It's family style eating. So this particular day, just plan on doubling your calorie intake because we will be eating very well. We'll also be staying at the Bavarian Inn, which is a charming hotel that is neat to just walk around. As it looks like a little Bavaria, but they also have miniature golf and they have water slides and a number of other things if you really want to let your hair down and enjoy the water park. The next day, after all that fun at Frankenmuth, we're going to be back on the bus and we're heading out of the country, crossing the border into Canada. And we'll see how Community of Christ continues to live and worship as a global family as we visit the Toronto Center Place. The Toronto Center Place is a great example of how you can share in community and worship without boundaries. And there in Toronto, we're also going to have a walking tour of the historic district, and we'll be able to highlight Community of Christ's rich history in Toronto. John Taylor's family lived just a few blocks from the Toronto Centre Place, and it's in the Taylor's home where the first cottage meetings were held in the 1830s, where the church first establishes itself in Canada. We'll also have a chance to explore R.C. Evans' story. R.C. Evans was born and raised in Canada. He was a convert to the reorganization, and he wore a variety of hats as a member of the church. He, as I mentioned, was a convert, but he also served as a 70, an apostle. He served as a counselor in the first presidency for both Joseph Smith III and his son, Frederick Madison Smith. And he also served as the bishop over Canada. So 4 decades more in leadership, followed by a sudden departure and a founding of an opposition church. It's a great story. So we'll be sharing some of that story right there in his home country. We'll also talk a little bit about Ada Clark, who married Joseph Smith III. She was his third and final wife, and she was also from this area. Then on day 7, we're going to head over to the famous Niagara Falls and see this incredible work of nature. Highlights of that 7th day include going on the Hornblower, which is the Canadian version of the Maid of the Mist, where we'll get on a boat that'll take us right up to the falls to experience the power of the water flowing over those mighty falls. You'll have an opportunity to stroll up and down the boardwalk, which you can see here, taking photos, experiencing the gardens near Niagara Falls. And of course, there's plenty of shopping to do in this area. And hopefully we'll have a beautiful day like what is seen here. We will then cross back over into the United States and have dinner in Buffalo and make our way to end the day just outside of Palmyra in a place called Victor, New York. So we'll be close to Palmyra, where we will start our day on October 13th at the Sacred Grove. And Peter leads a wonderful devotion there in Palmyra as we're beginning the day. Peter, you want to talk about what it is that we do at the historic site in Palmyra?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite places, one of my favorite stops, and uh, quite often, because of the way things are set up there, we have our devotion on the bus when we first arrive there. That gives us a little bit of privacy. It gives us an opportunity before we step off into this sacred place to prepare ourselves. And there's something about, any walk in the woods is a beautiful thing, but there's something really special walking through this grove of trees here. And there's paths that you can wind around and just almost you probably could literally get lost out there. But you can't help but feel close to God, and feel connected to our church's origin stories as well while you're there. And so for our devotion, usually our devotion is a preparation for us before we head out into the grove to experience it. And it's an opportunity to just bask in that space ourselves, and just be surrounded by beauty, be surrounded by the Spirit, and experience our own sacred moment in that grove, just as Joseph did so long ago.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful experience. We'll have that devotion on the bus, and then you're free to explore the Sacred Grove. You're also asked to go to the visitor center to begin the tour of the Smith family homes. There's the log home, which you see here, which would have been their first home in Palmyra. There's also a nice frame home that was built that you'll also have a chance to tour. But for some, they'll prefer to skip the tours in order to spend extra time in the grove. There's something about that sacred space that really is good for the spirit. So you have that flexibility, whether you want to dive into church history by touring the homes or just spend time in nature. We'll then leave the Sacred Grove and the Smith family farm and head into downtown Palmyra, where we'll have a chance to tour the Grand and Print Shop and see where the first edition of the Book of Mormon was printed. which is an educational experience for sure. And considering we're so close to it, we're just going to have to stop. Another stop we'll make is the Erie Canal there in Palmyra, where we'll pick up our lunch and grab a group photo. Um, the Erie Canal is celebrating a huge anniversary, and it just makes sense that we'll need to pay homage to such an incredible mode of transportation. So we'll also have a chance to check out Hill Cumorah as we are sailing out of Palmyra and headed to Kirtland, Ohio, where we will end the day at the Kirtland Community of Christ congregation. Um, there, I love this congregation. I now live in Kirtland and have thoroughly enjoyed spending time with this congregation. So that night on October 13th, we will dive into a church history class with Seth Bryant, who's the former site director of Kirtland Temple, and he'll lead a class called Holy Week and Pentecost in 1830s Community of Christ history. So Seth is going to explore our Kirtland history and shed new light on how the early Kirtland saints viewed the role of sacrament and scripture in their lives and worship. This includes our faith community's interest in early Hebrews and the emphasis on learning Hebrew grammar during the Kirtland period. Joshua Seixas, a Jewish scholar, taught a Hebrew grammar class for our first seminary held in Kirtland called the Kirtland, Ohio Theological Institution. And this seminary that was held up in the third floor of the Kirtland Temple was among the first seminaries in the state of Ohio. Seixas was a renowned Hebrew scholar with deep roots in the Jewish community, and early church members were fascinated by the ancient Jewish culture. They were fascinated by the Old Testament, fascinated by Egyptian cultures, and they encouraged church leaders during this time encouraged members to study Hebrew because they believed they could discover deeper truths found in the scriptures that may have been lost in translation. So that's why there was such a significant focus on Hebrew grammar. And Seth's going to talk about that. And his class is going to better prepare us for the next day when we travel to the Maltz Museum. Forgot to mention, we're looking here at a photo of people surrounding a table eating good food. We're going to have dinner with the Kirtland congregation that night. And following dinner, we'll dive into the class with Seth. The very next day, we're going to journey to the Maltz Museum, which is a Jewish heritage site, heritage museum, and we'll better make those connections between the Jewish community and the community of Christ from the 19th century as well as the 20th century. So we'll have a chance to tour that museum, learn more about the history of Judaism in the United States and all over the world. We'll then return to Kirtland, where we'll have dinner with the Kirtland congregation, and then we'll have a tour of the Kirtland Temple, which will be led by Seth Bryant and myself, two former site directors. And after that tour is over, we'll have a chance to have a closing service because this is the last night of our tour. It'll be a closing service, the last time we'll gather together in worship, and it'll also be a communion service in the lower court of the Kirtland Temple. And who better to preside over a service like that than Peter Smith?
And what better place to end our time together than to be in the Kirtland Temple celebrating communion together? If you haven't had communion in the Kirtland Temple, it is a beautiful experience. And if you have had communion in the Kirtland Temple before, you can never do it too many times. Every experience is unique. Every experience is just so deeply meaningful. Um, there's nothing like having an opportunity to sing "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning" in that space, and so that is a tradition that we will continue, hopefully through during this trip as well. And so I I would I I think I'm really excited. I'm stumbling on my words because I'm so excited about the fact that this is where we're going to end. We've never actually ended a tour in Kirtland at this service, and so I'm looking forward to it. I would imagine we'll have an opportunity to do a bit of sharing while we're here as well, and it'll be a powerful evening, a wonderful way to end our time.
Yeah, yeah, this will be a new experience for us. Um, Now to the nuts and bolts. That tour is going to end in Kirtland. It's going to be 10 days total. You'll be on the road from October 6th through the 15th. The price of the tour is only $2,000 per person. If you have a roommate or you're doing double occupancy, just $2,000. And it's $2,850 if you prefer a private room or single occupancy. That registration fee covers all of your transportation on the motor coach. It covers most of your meals, all of the admission for the museums and historic sites that we're going on. It's really, I think, a great deal because it's the same price as our 2023 tour. And I was excited that we were able to keep costs down in order to encourage more people to join us. As Peter mentioned, the tour is going to end in Kirtland rather than travel all the way back to Independence where we started. And a number of people have encouraged us to do a one-way tour that would allow us to spend more quality time at each of the sites where we stop on the tour. And so this is the first time we're going to give that a try for a domestic tour, which also means that you'll be flying home out of the Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, which is a fine airport located just south of Cleveland Center. But there will be an additional cost in getting a plane ticket home from Cleveland. We'll provide the transportation to get you from the hotel in Kirtland to the airport, but you don't want us involved in making your flight arrangements. We're going to leave that entirely up to you, as everyone has a different destination and schedule, and we want to give you the freedom to choose the flights that are most convenient for you. So that is our 2025 tour. I didn't think we'd have enough information to share even over a half hour, and I'm shocked we've talked for over an hour. Actually, Peter, did you want to say anything more?
Just one reminder about the time on the bus together, and what a kind of cool experience it is to be in that small space together. I know uh, there are times when we're on there for a while, and yet we get to know each other. We usually have an opportunity for people to share introductions about who they are, where they came from, what their passions are, and we'll do some singing on the bus. Quite often, we'll have class on the bus as well. It really is. You think that that would just be downtime where you're kind of wasting your time to get to the next place, but the bus is actually part of the trip, and we have some really good experiences on there. We've had some impromptu campfire singing before in the past that just was a lot of fun. So don't dread that part. I just want to encourage you to not to dread that portion of it. It will be part of the tour, and you'll have a good time on there as well. Maybe not all the time, but most of the time it'll be a great part of it as well.
Yeah, it's where you really get to know people. And there'll be introductions during the tour where you'll get to know your fellow guests throughout the 10 days that we're together. And you'll be surprised the amount of connections that you make with people who you're just meeting as you begin the tour. But by the end of the 10 days, I'm always amazed by how deep those connections can go, getting to know people and being in a reunion on the road. Again, friends, if you'd like to save your seat on this year's tour, head over to our website where you can download a tour reservation form. We would love for you to join us as we travel the Restoration Trail together again this October 6th through the 15th. Mention Wendy has already dropped a link in the chat that'll lead you to the tour webpage. That's on the Foundation's website. So I do want to end with a big thank you to Wendy for helping behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, telling us about the Mission Congregation, making all of it look so easy. Friends, I also hope you'll join us next Thursday as we kick off our spring lecture series with Paul DeBarth, and we hear the fascinating story of Frank and Benjamin Gerard. So until then, we hope you'll keep reading your Community of Christ history, and please do take care. We'll see you next week.